Hi, I'm Wayne and this is Bastow Woodworking. This is my Harbor Freight router table and there's a lot of problems with it, so we're going to try to address those today. The first problem with the router table is the tabletop itself. It's not of great quality and it's hard to work with. The miter slot is all but useless, so I'm going to use some 3/4 inch plywood to create a new router table. The second problem we're going to be addressing is the router itself. It's a very powerful router, and I have no complaints about the actual machine itself, but adjusting it is a huge pain. The router has no lift mechanism built into it. You just unlock the router and you manually move it up and down. So I bought a little car scissor jack on Amazon. I bought the cheapest one I could find. I'll link it down below. And I'm going to try to incorporate that into my new sealed router box down here that I'm going to try to build dust collection into, and then have the ability to raise and lower the router just by using either this wrench or just a socket on a drill.
To begin, I removed the screws holding the router table to my outfeed table, disassembled any switches, and freed the router from the table itself. I then measured the opening.
Now that the router table is removed and the router is unmounted from the table, I can now plan out how this is all going to go together. So the scissor jack will go in the bottom here. I have an 11/16 socket that will hopefully extend this out far enough that adjusting it will be easy, just using either a ratchet or a wrench. And then I will close in the 4 sides to build up dust collection inside. I'm hoping that just creating negative pressure inside the sealed chamber will create enough dust collection that airflow won't be too restrictive and this won't overheat.
I cut the new router table out of some birch plywood on my table saw. I marked the center point of the new table by drawing 2 diagonal lines from corner to corner. They intersect at the center, and this will be where I drill the hole in the table. I then turned my attention to the miter slot. I want to be able to use gauges from my table saw on this table, so I used one to help me lay out the slot. I was then able to cut my miter slot. I used a combination square to set the height of my blade to match the depth of the miter slot on my table saw. This way the gauge will fit flush in the slot in the router table. I made multiple passes with my full kerf blade, being sure to sneak up on my final width. As you can see, it's a perfect fit. I drilled a pilot hole in the center of the router table. I stepped up the diameter of the hole until I got to 1/4 inch. I then put a 1/4 inch drill bit in my router and put it in place. This allowed me to mark my mounting holes on the router table while guaranteeing the router stayed centered on the table. I then drilled the mounting holes for the router and then went over to the drill press and drilled insets so that the screw head will sit below the table. Next, I drilled a hole for the router bit. I wanted to be able to use the inserts that came with the Harbor Freight table, so I drilled a 2 1/4 inch hole about 1/8 of an inch deep, and then cut a 2 inch hole all the way through. I used my Shopsmith for this process, but it was a struggle. The table kept sliding down no matter how tightly I cranked on the table lock, so looking into that issue will be a future video. I ended up finishing the hole with a cordless drill. It was time to mount the router to the table. I did end up mounting it backwards here and had to turn it around to make the power cord reach. I turned my attention to the lift mechanism next, and started working out the physical connection between the scissor jack and the router. I came up with a sort of cradle that slots into the jaws of the scissor jack and simply holds the router. This gave me my first opportunity to use the marking gauge given to me by Jonathan at John Ford Woodworks. Huge thank you to Jonathan. If you have not checked out his channel yet, I highly suggest you do. I will put a link to his channel as a card and in the description below. I used the radial arm saw to cut a dado the width of the router base. After confirming a good fit, I just glued and clamped it together and set it off to the side to dry. I used some sandpaper and a small chisel to clean up my hole for the insert until I had a nice positive fit. With that done, I could turn my attention to creating the enclosure and working out dust collection. I cut my side panels out of 3/4 inch plywood on the table saw and then the radial arm saw. Once they were cut to size, I started marking my slot for access to the 11/16 socket that will be mounted to the end of the scissor jack. I then used a router for the first time in this router table build to cut the slot for the 11/16 socket. The socket will raise and lower about 2 inches as the bit raises and lowers, so I need to account for that in the slot. I then used a brad nailer to just tack the sides in place. I then cut the back out of a piece of particle board. I didn't want to waste a piece of 3/4 inch plywood on a part that would not be visible. I could then mark my mounting location for the scissor jack, drill the holes, and mount it using a couple of short lag bolts. I mounted the table using some number 8 wood screws. I gave the router table an initial sanding. Using a 2-inch hole saw, I drilled a hole for the dust collection and put a piece of PVC to attach my shop vac to.
Okay, the router lift is now functionally complete and it is working. So now I just need to figure out how I'm going to do the door. I think I'm going to just do like a piece of plywood on some hinges and a latch going across. But to do that, I'll need to remove this handle and I need to feed the wire for the switch through the 2x4 instead of having it come out and around like I did before. So now I'm going to start disassemble all that and get that going.
Disassembling the power switch was incredibly difficult. After stabbing myself with a screwdriver a couple of times, I decided to just cut the wire and install a new switch. I only had some toggle switches in my shop, so I used one of those. They are rated for up to 20 amps, so they are more than robust enough for this router. I would have preferred using a safety switch for this, but I had to work with what I had on hand, and the toggle switch only acts as an inline switch to the speed controller anyway, so you use 2 switches to turn the router on, and you only need to flip 1 switch to turn it off. Still, I will likely order a safety switch and swap it out shortly. I then grabbed some piano hinge and cut it to length using the $54 miter saw. It was then over to the table saw to cut out the door. Then gave everything a final sanding and coated all surfaces with some polyacrylic, doing about 3 or 4 coats on the top.
That's it for right now. I still have some other projects for this table that I want to do, including adding some rails to the side so that I can create a fence system for this router table. But for right now, it's perfectly usable. I have the miter slot cut so that I can fit my miter gauge for my table saw, which is great. I have the router lift working flawlessly, and I have dust collection installed. I still have to do some testing to see how effective the dust collection I just created is. It's going to be a little trial and error, but that's it for right now. So thank you for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to keep up to date with new projects as they are released. And until next time, thank you.